Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the 25.17 mid-lane tier list, so if you're content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There are a couple of changes to this patch, which notably we saw buffs towards the likes of Kassadin and Morgana. Profane Hydra got buffed, which was nice for champions like Quinn and some of the other assassins which sometimes opt into it. We also saw a buff towards AP Cogmore. I thought it would do a bit more, honestly. The change ended up being pretty decent for, like, traditional Cogmore. Like, the AP ratio on the W combined with just, like, a bit more on the Q, a bit more on the ulti was just an addition of damage. For AP Cogmore, though, he really needs a bit more damage on his E to be viable. I mean, it's not bad, though, at the moment. Like, you can play it in the right matchups. He still wins in some of those, some of the matchups which struggle a bit more into artillery, like your Aziz, for example. That's where, like, your Zerefs and your Cogmores have traditionally come out. And I think he's close, but maybe not quite there at the moment. So let's get into it. So the DT is going to consist of the same four champions. Varus has been in a pretty bad spot for a while now in, like, the mid lane, primarily being, like, the AP variation of Varus. It's really struggled ever since they quite heavily gutted the AP ratio on the kind of, like, W active rather than the W passive, which they actually ended up buffing up slightly. That being said, I just wouldn't really recommend playing Varus in the mid lane at the moment. There are just considerably other more performant options over him, and kind of the selling point of this champion is just the pick potential of his ultimate and his burst, and it just isn't as good, or it's too expensive. Like, the price of it's just too expensive to really, like, want to go to at the moment. Corki is obviously in, like, elite and competitive, a bit better of a mid lane option for, like, just traditional solo queue. He's quite the gold sink. He has no real setup. He's obviously, like, early game skewed, and that does end up meaning he's slightly predicated towards just being an elite skewed champion. I don't really recommend him, and it's relatively similar for the reasons that I don't really recommend the, like, Smolder or the Tristana, but these champions have just been nerfed quite heavily on, like, the wave clear side of things, albeit they still do have access to decent amounts of wave clear. Well, I can't see Tristana's fair. They are more matchup specific, and paired alongside, like, your AP junglers, I think they can be bumped up a tier, but they're the kind of picks which I just wouldn't really recommend for solo queue at the moment. In the C tier, then we lead off with Cogmore, who I thought would probably end up as, like, a B tier option, because the numbers of the previous patch didn't look horrible. Like, he looked like he could be kind of close with, like, a decent amount of, like, buffs, and these were, like, decent amount of buffs. Like, this was, like, AP ratio on Q by, like, 10%, AP ratio on W by 0.5, and I believe it was 10% on the ulti as well. Overall, just didn't really move the bar enough. I think they could have probably actually swung a bit harder on maybe the ulti or even the Q. The E, I think, is a dangerous one, because if you give AP Cogmore, like, E too much power, then he becomes really, really unassailable and pretty uninteractive, which can be quite a concern in certain situations. So that makes sense. But yeah, I'll have him in the C tier for the moment, because I just don't think he is quite there yet as a pick. But you can situationally opt into him. Lane Viego actually didn't land quite as well as I hoped it would. It ended up being it's like a low B, C tier pick. Like, you can definitely make it work, and I don't think it is horrible. I think there are actually matchups which it does quite well into, but it really lacks the same kind of oomph the old Lane Viego had with, like, the Divine Cinderer, where you had sustain, damage, durability all through, like, one item. And right now, yeah, you can opt into one of those things, whether that's the Bork for your sustain, your Kraken Slayer for your damage, or your, like, Cinder Sky for, like, your durability. He ends up lacking something, and that kind of, like, yeah, leaves him in this, like, C tier, like, B tier area. Don't think he's horrible. I think you can actually make him work, and he can be quite an like a skill expressive champion if you, like, play around your mist correctly, and how you're, like, kind of playing out the lane, and, like, how you want to go about, like, the combos. I think that can, yeah, like, lead you to have some outplay potential, but not quite. He's assailable at the moment, which can definitely be a big struggle of a champion like Viego. Yone have him in the C tier. He's just been over-nerfed. The champion's under the bar at the moment. They can't buff him because of competitive and the lack of AD mid pool in competitive at the moment. And Yone is, like, the lead, like, of that, like, pool. I think it's, like, Yone and then probably, I want to say Jace Corki, if I remember off the top of my head, in terms of, like, the priority, and yeah, that you can't really buff Yone for that reason. Whether they'll adjust him at some point, I'll be interested to see. But yeah, right now he's below the bar, and I don't really recommend him. Jace is just a very hard champion to pilot. I think mid is less punishing than top lane. Like top lane, I would basically recommend completely avoiding up until like master. For mid lane, the lane is shorter. It's harder to get run down. You can opt into just like these raw burst builds, which are like you're playing more just off your like front loaded damage rather than like comboing effectively, albeit you still need to combo well. If you don't, then you will just end up missing out on damage. I don't recommend him that highly because the reasons I said, I think he's very, very hard to pilot well, and yeah, I have him in the C tier for that reason. Same goes for Gangplank, same goes for Azir. I think these champions, if you sink time into them, can be really rewarding, but they are basically like OTP champions, like especially in solo queue. I think Azir as a pick is obviously very, very competitively skewed. Obviously in history, he's one of the most competitively bound champions to have ever existed. That makes obviously a huge amount of sense, being this like very unique AP hyper carry with the ability to control, win a lot of like most lanes, scale really well. It just has a lot of tools at his disposal, and I think if you like struggle with that like overwhelming like sense of like needing to do a lot of things, then I would just recommend looking towards other things. I think for times like mental stack, when it can be quite hard to play some of these picks. What else we got? So Mel and Rise actually wrap up the C tier. Mel obviously isn't a C tier pick if you max E, but it's always the same every single patch. People still max Q, and she is punished for maxing Q. She is a C tier, close to even D tier champion in that case. Like, she really doesn't put out particularly good numbers, but if you E max, she looks like a B, like even A tier champion. It's a very strong spell, gives you wave clear, gives you CC, just a lot of things which Mel really values as a champion. And then Rise, he's been in a slightly more competitively balanced state for a while now. I don't think the champion's bad. He sits towards the high end of the C tier and can easily compete with the tiers above him, but does have obviously some level of skill expression, and I recommend other things over him because I think they're just easier to pilot and just pick up and play. Moving out of the C tier to the B tier is Kassadin. He's a high B tier. I think you can make a genuine argument to pick him in a lot of I said a lot of spots, in primarily just counter pick scenarios. Like that is where Kassadin really shines as a champion. I believe it was AP ratio on both Q and E, if I remember correctly, and that's really nice. Like, I think Kassadin needed to be buffed, and this is the kind of buff which he like is good with, and I think this is like the correct kind of place for him to be in. The other picks within the B tier are the likes of Talia and Ari, who sit towards the low end of the B tier at the moment. They've just been slightly over-nerfed, primarily because of competitive. Ari actually puts out pretty bad results in solo queue. I think she is worth watching. I really don't recommend her quite as much anymore, especially with like the Aurora build kind of going away. I think Malignance and Blackfire are like competitive first items, if I remember correctly, and then you can opt into things like Horizon Focus. I think even Lichbane works quite nicely as second item, and there are different ways you can kind of go out building this champion, but she's definitely on the weaker side at the moment. Twisted Fate, I don't like him that much. I think obviously he ended up basically gaining a net 5% attack speed on E from the buffs, and then like the nerfs to kind of follow back when obviously like the Twisted Fate MSI incident. I think you can still be like valuable as a champion, but point and click CC combined with the global pressure of the ultimate, the like skill explosive laning phase of the champion. That being said, though, I just think he's a bit on the low. I mean, he's obviously like lower agency in some regards. Like, he doesn't have the damage to kind of carry your team, but it can be like, if you understand how to play the macro game, which for like mid to low elo, it's just not really something I recommend quite as much, because people will make high variance plays consistently, and I think you can be punished in that environment. So I don't really recommend him as a champion, but there is definitely some level of value to paying the pick at the moment. Brander's just doing a bit better at the moment. I have him in the B tier. The buffs were nice. Increased duration on the stun on Q, combined with, I believe it was some CD on ultimate. Just nice changes. Brings him back to being kind of like this relevant-ish mid to low elo skewed mid laner. Like, I think you can play him, and you should be able to get some level of results out of the champion. Garen's been a bit on the weaker side for a while, ever since he obviously received those changes to kind of lower his burst and push him more towards Bruiser-esque builds. He's been he doesn't quite have the same level of agency, and he's still going the same build, so he just ends up being a slightly less reliant and not as consistent champion, because he just doesn't have the same level of burst and like snowball like potential. And that being said, though, mid lane still looks to be his more performant role. I still have him in the B tier. I still think you can make him work. He's just not gonna be quite as bursty as like the previous iteration. Twitch mid, a genuine pick. I think he can do a huge amount of damage. He has good wave clear, good roams with the Q and the invis. I think he's a genuine champion in the mid lane. Make sure you're playing PTA though. That is just like the main takeaway of the champion. Malphite, you can play AP or you can play tank. Tank obviously comes in primarily as a counter pick. Don't blame Malphite. You'll get answered by Silas and then you'll be miserable. AP Malphite, I think in the right spots can be quite good. You can even opt into like a tank with like a malignant, so you have a bit more agency. I think that can be quite a nice way of playing the champion as well. So I don't have him in the B tier. That being said, like he just isn't quite as high agency when you play him as a tank. Like you are only drafting him late. I don't think Malphite's in the greatest state he's been in, but mostly comes from like tank items just being a bit on the weaker side, and a lot of tanks having their kits just like inflated to kind of match the tank items being weaker. Like so the base value buffs which like Sion and Cho'Gath have received, like if you look at their numbers, like Cho Q is like I believe 300 or 320 like at 4 points, which is like crazy to think about compared to where it like has been in previous iterations. But yeah, Malphite, I'm in the B tier at the moment. He can, like a lot of the B tier champions, compete with the A tier. I just think he's a bit more situational, which is why I don't recommend him quite as highly. He's easy to play though. Gygus, mostly played by OTPs in the mid lane. Obviously you're playing primarily just like the AP burst variant of Gygus. You can like flex and play like Bruiser, AP Bruiser Gygus. I don't think it's like going to be the main way you're playing the champion though, and I don't think he's bad. I think he actually can be quite good in the right spots. The displacement on the champion combined with the burst can be genuinely quite valuable. Lissandra, I have her in the B tier. I think I maybe overrate her when I have her like towards the high end of the B tier. I don't think she's actually like that amazing at the moment. She's definitely been better in previous iterations, and I think she could do with a buff. Like it's been a while since Lissandra's really been in the meta, so I'm going to have her towards the low end of the B tier. So I do think that she ends up being just a situational counter pick, and if you're not comfortable with the champion, you should probably just avoid her for the most part. Not really worth sinking time into her at the moment. Aso is a champion, I'd say, which is worth the watch at the moment. I have him. I'm actually going to put him at like the top of the B tier as well. I think the pick looks quite good numbers wise at the moment. I think he has really hard matchups which can be quite punishing. Some of the assassins can definitely make his life quite miserable, but if you can just freely scale, especially in like mid to low elo where the games are traditionally just going to go quite long, I think he can be a genuinely quite good champion. He does struggle in high elo. There are lots of matchups which will really heavily punish him, so I'd say just be careful of that. But like for the moment, I'd say he's a high B tier champion. Like I think he's genuinely not a bad pick at the moment. Cassiopeia has definitely fallen on the weaker side. I would only really recommend come out as a champion when you're like looking for a situational counter pick to maybe like some of the low range mages in the mid lane or into short range compositions. Traditionally you see her as like an answer to Silas or I believe Rise in competitive. That's a bit more common, and I just don't really recommend the champion as much at the moment though, but she does have spots where she can be really valuable, so I'd also leave her as like a mid B tier pick. And then the string of assassins, which I always have in the B tier, the Kiana, the Talon, the Zed. I think all these champions can be really, really good if piloted really well. They are just restricted by the fact that they are, unless you OTP them, you're traditionally not going to play them. That's always like the limitation of these picks. And I mean, the most egregious, but like kind of, the most egregious version of like all these assassins is Katarina. I mean, like Katarina is like the most OTP driven champion in the game, I believe. Kiana is very, very elite skewed. I mean, it's so funny looking at Kiana's numbers, like mid low elo compared to like elite and like high elo, where I think elite and high elo Kiana is like one of, if not just the definitive best champion in the game, especially in jungle. Like jungle Kiana is absurdly overpowered at the moment. But for like mid to low elo, she's balanced, if not on the slightly weaker side, which is always like it shows just how much time you need to put into this champion and like really understand how to like pilot her, how to kind of use her around the map. I think it's so crucial understanding that, and I would really recommend avoiding like ever first timing any of these champions. But if you've put time into them, they can be really rewarding. So I wouldn't sleep on these picks because obviously they have their like really high highs, but don't like opt into them if you just haven't got the time in, because it's a good way of just losing the game. Aurora, I have in the beta. She's like a low beta option. Mid lane Aurora really doesn't perform quite as well as top lane Aurora at the moment. I think she can be really good, and she is to an extent elite skewed at the moment, and I think that also ends up being a bit of a limitation of the champion. I think they could do some level of unelite skewing of the pick, but whether they want to do that and whether like her audience even wants that, I'm not so sure. So yeah, they'll probably just leave her as she is for the moment. She can have really high highs though, so just sits within like the B tier of like I think yeah the champion has a lot of potential still. Vel'Koz, have him in the B tier. Obviously Horizon Focus got buffed this patch, and I believe it is Vel'Koz, Ahri, Ziggs, and Xerath as the top 4 users of the item. Vel'Koz, I'm going to leave him at the top of the B tier. I still think he is, he traditionally is played by OTPs mostly. And if you're an OTP, then you're very comfortable with the state of the champion. I think he's been in a pretty good state for a while now. That being said, I think Horizon Focus is like competitive with, I believe, Shadow Flame second. Like you can opt into either one. Vel'Koz, I still think is a traditionally going to come out as like a counter pick, or in situations where like being an artillery mage isn't as punishing. Like he does struggle into assassins, like your ASOLs, like your Xeraths, like your Syndras, for example. These champions can definitely fall vulnerable to that. I have him in the B tier though. Like I think he can be quite good in the right spots. Morgana, I'm also really tempted to move Morgana up to the A tier. Like the buff was massive, really nice. I think she's a genuine mid pick now. The W damage went up on the like first couple of levels, and the mana cost going down from like 70 to 130 I believe it is to 70 110 is so big. It means so much to this champion. Being able to have like a couple more W casts and have a bit more damage early on to the game, so you can more effectively wave clear and get maybe like all it might translate to is like an average of like 1 or 2 or even like a full wave of CS like difference. Like you might be able to secure it more effectively, so that will be meaningful. You have a bit more gold and you can translate that into obviously more damage throughout the game. So Morgana, I have a top of B tier. I might move up to the A tier next patch depending on kind of how things shape up, but definitely don't sleep on her. I'd honestly even recommend just trying her out and see how you feel with the champion. Ziggs, I think the hype for the champion has kind of died down ever since like those huge changes a while ago. His numbers in mid are fine. I don't think he's like one of the premier artillery options. Like obviously out of the artillery pool, he's like pretty good. Like the Vel and Xerath, I wouldn't say are definitively the best mid laners at the moment, so he kind of floats around that area. I think you can put time into him, and he can be rewarding to put time into, so I actually have him still towards the high end of the B tier. He's just not like the monster champion, which I think people kind of like hyped him up to be on the like the patch where he was buffed. And then Cho'Gath is the other champion within the B tier. I actually have 2 more champions in the B tier. Orianna, I'm dropping down from the A to the B tier. Her solo queue numbers just aren't as good as like the kind of like projected strength of her in competitive at the moment. I think she just drops down to the B tier. She can be quite hard to pilot, but she's a good champion to have in your pool. Like I think I really recommend learning Orianna, because she's just one of the best mages to kind of learn and just play. Cho'Gath, I'm gonna drop towards the middle of the B tier. He's still fine in the mid lane. Like he can still be quite a good option even, but with like the nerfs to like the symbiotic souls, the nerfs to him, Chevalier just not being that good of an item at the moment, he's definitely fallen away a bit over time, so I do have him in like the middle of the B tier now. Moving on to the A tier then, we lead off with Anivia, who's probably one of her weaker states. She's still good, like don't be wrong. I think Anivia can still be a very frustrating champion and can still be really good in the right spots, but definitely with some of the nerfs towards like your Serfs and your Rowers, I think she's definitely fallen a bit weaker. I believe she also received like a slight armor growth nerf like before those other nerfs came in, so she ended up being like triple tagged in a way. Still a good champion, still like an A tier option, just not quite the like dominant S tier pick, which I think she was for quite a while. Fizz sits in the A tier. He's a good counter pick assassin. I would recommend landing him as a counter pick. He can be very frustrating for certain champions to play against, and a lot of them traditionally are quite popular. So yeah, Fizz gonna have him in the A tier at the moment. Vex, I think, also really nice as a counter pick option. Denies a lot of the heavy mobility picks within the mid lane. Things like Yasuo, for example, can really easily be shut down by a Vex. She's obviously played by primarily OTPs. Like, you won't see this champion outside of, like, people who've sunk a lot of time into her. But I think if you want to learn her, she can be a valuable champion to learn. If you don't want to learn her, that's perfectly fine, though. I think there are still a plethora of options which can be used to kind of counter some of the champions which she is used into. Zoe's been in a pretty good spot for a while now. The buff towards the AP items combined with buffs towards her, I believe it was, were nice. She obviously ended up getting nerfed a couple patches ago to kind of Zoe is a really dominant champion in China. That's always like something you got to take away from like this pick. Like the pick I believe has like one of the highest ban rates over there. Same with like Kane. And yeah, I mean, the champion just generally like quite strong at the moment. I think other regions like also think she's quite strong, and Zoe support is also like a great option. So if you want to play Zoe, I think she's in a great state at the moment to be playing the champion. In the case of Sion, great Stonewall champion. I think he can be on the lower agency side. Like, if you want something with high agency, Sion isn't the champion I would recommend going to, but he can just nullify almost all the mages in the game. Assassins can't really get through him, and that is an incredibly valuable thing to be able to opt into. So I have him in the A tier at the moment, and the buffs like more recently like solidified him as like an A tier option. But he does lack the agency, which I traditionally recommend for solo queue. Like, I recommend champions which can just do a lot on the map, and Sion, albeit his ult can be a great tool for like moving onto sides, I do think you want something with a bit more damage so you have the ability to just individually kill the carries on the enemy team. Silas, I have him in the A tier. I think as like a counter pick option, he can also be really good. Blind Silas is not in the greatest states, but just like the protobout, like honestly, like burst orientated Silas, or even just like the protobout into like Riftmaker, more bruisery Silas, can both be really good in the right spots. Aurelia, Silver Champion, I basically recommend completely avoiding unless you are a one trick or someone who's got a lot of time in the pick. She's incredibly volatile and explosive at the moment. The buffs were nice, like the fact that she's slightly stronger with Baron, and the fact that she has 2 seconds off the ECD later on in the game is meaningful. It does help her. She solidifies her spot still within the A tier. But if you're not someone who is comfortable with the champion, don't play it. Like, she is so reliant on snowballing and just crushing the early game because of a champion just falls off so aggressively later on into the game. And Fury still sits within the A tier. Profane got buffed this patch. Axiom got buffed this patch. I believe she can opt into both in some spots. And yeah, I mean, she just sits as a nice AD A tier option. Her popularity is pretty heavily fallen away within the mid lane, so she's definitely not quite the like premier of the A tier or even like the S tier. But she sits quite nicely as like a middle of the pack A tier option. Nico, obviously really popular with support these days, but mid lane Nico still a really good champion. You are definitely like needing to abuse the fact that she's a good laner, like the harass she has in lane combined with the power of her ultimate in like those early team fights, really meaningful, and you really have to exploit it. Always the champion just becomes a lot weaker than some of the other options around her. I also recommend like really learning how to utilize the W on this champion effectively, otherwise that you are also going to be losing a lot of her like agency and power through that. So those are like the key takeaways of Nico. If you're not comfortable doing like either of them, then you should definitely look towards other champions. If you can do one, I think she's passable as an option, but if you like, you really want to be able to like master the W and kind of like the play pattern of the champion to really get a lot of value out of the pick. Heimerdinger, I slept on a tier champion. I think he's really niche, obviously, like not a huge amount of people play him, but I think in the right spots and like against most champions, he can really comfortably just like dominate the laning phase and have like really high like burst kind of moments within the game, which can like turn team fights, like control the tempo of the game. And yeah, I think the pick is in a pretty good spot at the moment. Veigar is obviously kind of gatekept into this elo bracket. Like, this is where he is going to be strongest, like the mid to low elo range. he's not a good champion for high elo. Like, I really recommend learning other things alongside him if you are playing him. If you want to one-trick him, I think he can be fine, like, all the way up into, like, Diamond, maybe even Master. But once you get up there, like, people are going to just not allow you to have the freedom of stacking. You don't have the agency early on into the game, and that can be really punishing for this champion. And he's been in a good state for a while now. The buffs to, like, her base kit and, like, shifting power away from Tibbers to her base kit is really nice for her just general agency, especially, like, earlier on into the game. It's why she's actually seeing a decent amount of competitive play these days. That being said, though, Tibbers is still a really powerful summon, and just the damage output of this pick can be really valuable. Point-and-click CC just has a lot of tools which can be really valuable to the game in general. Swain, really like him as a counter pick into low damage team compositions which don't really have the tools to kind of like punish him. His laning phase is obviously better these days. Like Swain of the past was a lot weaker in lane, but these days you can opt into like Airy, Scorch, and just like really harass with your Q. Just gives him a lot more kind of like, it gives him more agency within the game. Allows him to be on the map quicker, earlier, which is really powerful for this kind of champion. I think he's a very deserving A-tier option. He can even compete quite nicely with like some of the S-tier picks, so definitely don't sleep on him as an option. I think he also, yeah, is very, very deserving to be here. Malzahar, similar to Veigar, like I actually have them in a relatively like equal spot where they're great for mid to low elo, but definitely struggle a lot more the higher up you go. I think Malzahar translates a bit better because you are playing more around just like your first item, like your chapter into your like your Blackfire or your Malignance. I've seen like people go different ways with this, but once you get access to that, I think the pick can be really strong and like very deserving of like an A-tier option at the moment. Xerath is my recommended artillery option. Really like him as a pick. Benefited from Horizon Focus being buffed this patch. I believe it is competitive with Shadowflame second on Xerath as well. So it really depends on like what you want within the game. Victor sits within the A-tier champion. I really recommend learning him. He has a lot of core kind of like gameplay aspects which can be mirrored onto other champions, and I think understanding how to utilize the stacking, the wave clear, kind of bullying people a bit more within lane is really valuable in this champion. He's more of a mid-game champion, but he can be, I mean, he's quite strong early, quite strong late. He's just generally like a good mage to have within your pool at the moment. Renekton, I primarily just recommend using him as a counter pick within the mid lane, to like your Yones and your Yasuos, as they are still very, very common champions, and he does quite nicely into a lot of the assassins in the mid lane. Being able to opt into like Stride, Eclipse, Cleaver just gives him a lot of versatility as well, so I'd have him as a pretty solid A-tier option at the moment. Yasuo is still like one of my higher A-tier options, not my definitive like top A-tier option, like AD option, because I think there are two more which are slightly better than him at the moment, but definitely towards the high end of the A-tier. He just requires like setup and like airbornes through like other champions on your team, and you traditionally want like an AP jungler like when you're playing him to kind of like maximize the value of the pick. Akali sits within the A-tier, my recommended assassin. I think Akali works really nicely into like your blind Orianas and just a lot of your immobile mages within the mid lane. I think this champion really shines at the moment and is a very deserving A-tier option. Syndra has been in really good state for a while now, very deserving, like sitting towards the top of the A-tier. The CC she provides from like such long range combined with her upfront burst potential, her laning phase, being able to kind of have a lot of skill expression through like skill shot usage and how you're like positioning yourself. I really like her as an option, and I really do recommend her as well. Hui also sits towards the top of the A-tier as well. I also recommend learning Hui. Like a lot of the top of the A-tier picks are still picks which I really do recommend learning because they have so much versatility and have so many key kind of like skills and aspects of the game which make them really valuable to just have in your pool. I think Hui, utilizing the effective like wave clear this champion has and the just overall DPS he can provide is so strong. Really like him for that kind of option. Lux maybe shouldn't be quite the definitive top of the A-tier. Like I'd have her as more like a mid A-tier pick, but also still really good. The laning like bullying capability of this pick I think is really slept on. Combined with like her wave clear, her burst, her snowball potential, all of that is really nice at the moment. So yeah, gonna like maintain her spot within the A-tier. And then the S-tier options. So I've bumped Quinn up. I'll have Quinn and Pantheon next to each other. Quinn is probably my number one recommendation. I wouldn't be surprised if she got nerfed this patch, 25.18, because the buffs were like towards Profane were just so big for her. Being able to access a wave clear item, like what was it, 350 or 250 gold earlier, is massive. It just gives her so much power to work with. Like, even if the gold cost went down, like the AD went down the same as the gold cost, like if it lost 10 AD and it lost 350 gold, it'd still be a buff because you are getting access to the full completed item earlier, but it was power positive, and that's so meaningful. So Quinn moved up to the S tier, really, really good option at the moment. Pantheon maintains the spot within the S tier. He's a really, really powerful mid laner. Honestly, solo queue wise, mid lane is probably just his strongest role. Being able to roam onto both sides, winning against most of the mid lane pool, the point and click CC. He just has so many tools to work with at the moment, and I really do recommend having him as one of your AD options, at least within the mid lane. The assassins include the likes of Kennen, Echo, Diana. I guess Vladimir kind of falls in the same vein. I think all these picks are really great AP options to have at the moment. Echo and Diana are... So Diana's a really good laner. I think people really sleep on the fact that Diana's so powerful in lane. Like, that Q sweep just does so much damage. Echo like has some really, really polarizing lanes, which he can just absolutely stomp and kind of take over the game. The kind of like the value of AP on this pick is so high. Vladimir, still really good champion, still has the kind of like... It's hard to move Vladimir out of lane, and he still scales like a monster, so I really do recommend just like having him as like an available option in some matchups. Kennen is a bit more niche. Like, I don't think you need to learn Kennen, but he's still a really, really performant mid laner. The damage this champion can output, like the scaling, the team fighting with the ultimate, all really, really high and all really, really valuable. Kayle and Galio, I actually have like... But, I mean, they are S tier picks. I think Galio is really a nice champion to play, counter to so many of the AP options here, being opted into like the Hollow Radiance build with like a Rift Maker, or just the Protobelt higher damage like variant can also be quite nice in the right spots. Phase Rush, Aftershock, Electrocute has different keystone options, really, really like flexible in the way he can function. I really do recommend him like highly as an S tier option. And then Kayle, I think people have realized that Kayle is a very, very strong mid lane pick at the moment. Really hard to punish. Wins, like, can even win some lanes in the mid lane. Like, the damage output this champion can still provide early onto the game. Obviously, it isn't as high as other options, but she can do stuff. So I think that is something which people can kind of sleep on in certain situations. The ult is a really powerful tool, and obviously like the scaling, getting access to like your Nashor, your Rabadon, and then like you can be a bit more flexible with like your third slots, but like your Lichbanes, your Rylai's, your Zhonya's. There's different ways you can go with this champion. Your Shadow Flames even. Yeah, she's in a really good spot at the moment. I really do recommend just like having her as one of your mid lane picks. So those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.